The following program was produced by the Theosophical Society in America.
I can remember very vividly my first Earth Day. I was a senior in high school. Now you know how old I am. And we were planting trees. And I was just thinking, I would love to visit those trees in 40 years, what a tree can do. And so I'm glad to be here. I'm also really pleased to be here because I have made the integration of ecology and spirituality a life work. And so for me, this is a wonderful way to share with you my own passion and my enthusiasm. And it's with this slide. At this time in history, we have a deeper understanding that the mystical journey and the scientific journey resonate. And that for the first time in our human experience, since the maybe 16th, 17th century, the two disciplines can once again converge. There's a real healing going on in that great split that happened with the Enlightenment within Western culture. And so here we are tonight with that resonance. I'm also here tonight because I want to celebrate the life and work of Father Thomas Berry. He died this year, and he was very influential in my own spirituality. When I was a novice in my own Wheaton Franciscan community, I had the opportunity to hear him speak, and we were studying the text of the prayer of St. Francis that praises all the creatures. And it was one of those moments where time and space stood still for me, and I could hear the words that I practically knew by heart in a totally fresh way. You may know this experience in your own life, these moments that are highly charged and numinous, and there's a breakthrough moment, and it literally changed the course of my studies, and it changed the course of how I understand being a Franciscan in the world, how I understand being a follower of Francis. So a tribute to Father Thomas Berry, and a lot of the quotes tonight will be his words and my response to them. So see how they fit with you. And as you listen, I'm going to encourage you, if something has particular emotional energy for you, to note it. If there's a resonance for you, to note that. And if there is a dissonance, to note that. As a Jungian trained psychologist, I'm very interested to what we're attracted to and what we're repulsed by, because that's where the good stuff is, in the attraction and in the repulsion. So in those places is the growth and the new edges. So it's the great work we are about tonight. Thomas Berry would say, there is no work but the great work. And that is the work that helps us humans have a more appropriate relationship with creation. If you look around, there's a kind of dis-ease that sometimes arises in me. My mother lives in Florida, where they've drained the Everglades. And I will say to you, as I walk along the sidewalks and I see the remnant of what once was this gorgeous natural preserve, this incredible ecosystem, it feels odd to see it all drained. There's a kind of reverberation in the air. And so how to have a relationship with that reality, this is the great work. So I offer you this slide, this picture. Anything wrong with this picture? I knew you'd say it. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this picture. Most people will say it's upside down. We are accustomed to seeing South America on the bottom and the North American continent on top, of course. But there is absolutely nothing wrong. Any angle at which we would see this is absolutely right. It's as it was, and as it is, and as it expresses itself. And we are really the first generation of humans to see this image and know this image. Now, I want to say this. Thomas Berry was acutely aware of this reality. To know and see this image and to have it impact us in how we know it is the same shift that happened when people realized that the world was round. Right? See, it's the same shift. Now we know, of course, we had empirical evidence that the world is round in a really fresh way, but we also know how fragile it is. and how small it is and what a huge context it is in. So this is my guiding metaphor this night. This is my religious symbol I offer to you. This is my deep archetype that underlies what I'm about to say. So there it is. Isn't she gorgeous? All right, so now a few quotes to set more context. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. To hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Lovely, huh? You get that deep poetic sense of William Blake as he understood everything is connected. Everything. And then William Wordsworth. Come forth into the light of things. Let nature be your teacher. Wouldn't it be amazing if we built a curriculum where nature set the parameters for the curriculum, and math and science and the more technical aspects of the curriculum were really taught by nature first, not as an afterthought? It'd be world-changing. And then, of course, Rachel Carson, for whom the first Earth Day was dedicated. Drink in the beauty and wonder at the meaning of what you see. So the religious spiritual quest to make meaning of what we see in nature, not simply to use it, but to make meaning. That is the spiritual understanding, making meaning of what we see. And then Emerson, of course, our life is an apprenticeship to the truth that around every circle another can be drawn, that there is no end in nature, but every end a beginning. And in the Franciscan world, we say there is no death, there's only transitus, there's only transformation, there's only birth into new birth, life into new life. That there is always another dawn, risen on the mid-noon, and under every deep, a lower deep opens. To move beyond the superficial of what we see. Imagine, particularly now in this season, as you see the beautiful flowering trees, not just to see the flower, but to see the whole arc of the tree. That's the task of it, huh? These blossoms last only a few days, and they're gone. And then what is the meaning of that for the life cycle of the tree, huh? And then what metaphor might that offer us in the living of our life? So, now, here it is. This is why I stand before you today. If everyone in the world were afforded the same lifestyle I live, we would need 4 planets to accommodate that. It's huge reality. For everyone to have the same opportunities I do, you do, it would require 3 more planets, 4 Earths to do that. It's a profound, profound responsibility. It's a really profound stewardship question. And I want to say, it is for me the primary religious, spiritual question. How can this be? How can this be? And that, for me, that's code. Whenever I run into something in my life and I say, how can this be? Right there is the opening for spirit. It's in our Judeo-Christian text when the angel says to Mary that there'll be more life, and she says, how can this be? Do you see? Hear it? So shorthand, when you say, how can this be, think angels are hovering. There's about to be an annunciation. So here's my annunciation for you, and the reason that I, day after day, take up this work. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age perversely. I love that word. Whenever I share this poem, they say, perversely. And it's like this: against ordinary common sense, against ordinary wisdom, against the common way to go about business. And so Thomas Berry would say, we need a new common sense. We need an earth sense. And so there it is. And so thank you for being here this evening. Thank you for tuning in. It's wonderful to know that I stand with you, and age after age, with no extraordinary power, we do indeed reconstitute the world. So, how to do this? Thomas Berry would say, it requires cathedral building. Now, cathedral building thinking. So, here it is. It takes several hundred years to build cathedrals. And so now we are building, he says, the cathedral that is the earth community. And everything that a cathedral is intended to be: a place for education, a place for celebration, a place for sharing of resources, a place for high ritual, a place for healing, a place for consolation, a place for hope. Everything a cathedral is, we are earth making. And so he now says the cathedrals of the world, and he uses nature metaphors, the cathedrals of the world themselves. The arch of the cathedral itself takes on the shape of the uplifted throat of the wolf. Can you just see the wolf howling, how it might be the arch of the cathedral, lamenting our present destiny, beseeching us to bring back the sun, to let the flowers bloom, the rivers run, and the earth and all its living creatures, here it is, listen to this, live their wild, fierce, serene, abundant life. Wild, fierce, serene, abundant. This is not Disney World. And he would say that one of the symptoms is that people would prefer a Disney World jungle to the real thing, because it doesn't have mosquitoes and dangerous creatures. It has lost a lot of its character, and yet we think this is the jungle. So interesting. Think yourself. How would you prefer nature? How would I prefer nature? So how did he get to this insight? Thomas Berry was the third in a family of 13 children, a very good Catholic family, I might add. Now, he wrote in his book, The Great Work, that when he was 11, he had this great epiphany. By the way, this is the very house in which he lived. This was his epiphany, and he writes this: the field was covered with white lilies rising above the thick grass. A magic moment. It gave himself something that he still doesn't know, but at a profound level, it changed him more than any other experience he can remember. This experience of encountering the field in its essence, these lilies. And it wasn't only the lilies, it was the whole context, the singing of the crickets, the woodlands, and the clouds in the clear sky. It was the whole experience. I am sure all of us can remember a time that nature utterly transfixed us. This is a deeply profound, ordinary, that is to say, available to everyone, human experience. Now, he writes, as an adult, whatever preserves and enhances this meadow in the natural cycles of its transformations is good. What is opposed to the meadow or negates it is not. So as a child, he had a sense that if something happened to the meadow, it was really bad. And if, indeed, something helped the meadow fully flower, it was good. So his ethics began there and then. So he says now, good economics, jurisprudence, law, political affairs recognize the rights of this meadow and the creek and the woodlands to exist and flourish in the ever-renewing seasonal expression. If economics are good, if the laws are good, if governance is good, they take into account the natural world around them. I remember when I was in leadership in my own Franciscan community, and we had to choose what to do with our campus, rather than develop it for what would make common economic sense, we opted to put in a prairie. And I must say, it's been a number of years now that the meadowlarks have returned. And it's a wonderful thing to know that we've restored the meadowlarks where they once were 50 years ago, and now they're back. It's a lovely way to understand connection. He also spoke about a Boy Scout trip that he took, and that he learned the names of trees during that trip. And it's a great event in his life, as he says. He says it this way: I learned what names mean and what the capacity to name something means. This is a profound Native American insight as well. To know the name of something is to be in relationship with it. To have, to give something a name means I have a particular responsibility for it. I think about my own poodle Hopkins, this 50 pounds of bounding energy, and we named Hopkins, and now Hopkins depends on us and the kind of connection we have with our domestic pets. It is the same to know the name of our species. It is the same kind of connection. Small, large, microcosm, macrocosm. So a little bit more of Thomas's life. He enters the Roman Catholic order, Passionist order at 20. And he says this was his reason. I recognized I couldn't survive in the world the way it was becoming. I joined the monastery to escape from a world that was becoming crassly commercial so that I could find meaning. Hark back to Rachel Carson, to find meaning. And so he did what was a natural inclination, to find meaning, to enter a contemplative community, to find meaning, to develop a prayer life, recognizing that there was a commercial, superficial aspect to life, entering a religious understanding. Now here's where it gets interesting. He was ordained in 42, and he learned Sanskrit and Chinese so that he could study the religions. Now his first movement was not to ecology, but to another culture. And he said, if I want to know that culture, I must know how that culture speaks. I must know how it thinks to understand it. And then he was an army chaplain during the war, and then he returned to America, and he taught world religions at St. John's University, where I first heard about him. And he was renowned as a teacher. People would flock to his seminars because he always had this very unusual twist to how he thought. And it was a fresh, exciting way to understand life. And of course, most famously was his Riverdale Center with this incredible 400-year oak that he spent hours every day sitting under and relating to. Sounds like the Buddha, doesn't it? To be taught by this amazing tree. The center and the tree are now gone, much to all of our dismay. Progress, you know? By the late 80s, Thomas Berry had shifted his interest into ecology, inspired by that incredible oak. And he began to call himself a geologian. Now, this is a new species of theology, way ahead before there was any kind of ecofeminist thought. He called himself a geologian or a scholar of the earth, and published privately the Riverdale Papers, which are now gems of the early Berry thinking. They have not yet been published fully, and so we await that posthumous publication. They are very, very challenging, if you catch my drift, and had he published them during his lifetime, who knows if he would have been able to continue writing. So grateful that we have the papers. So if you're interested in his books, these are the books that are published, and I recommend them to you. In particular, I recommend Evening Thoughts, The Earth as a Sacred Community, and also The Christian Future and the Fate of the Earth. Those two, The Sacred Universe and The Christian Future and the Fate of the Earth, newly published. And if you like the interface of science and theology, I recommend The Universe Story that he writes with the physicist Brian Swim. So these are the texts that might be of interest to you. So now, What is in these texts? Here it is in a nutshell. Thomas Berry would say, I can summarize my work in one sentence, and it has 7 parts. So he would go on to say it's this. The historical mission of our time is to reinvent the human. Right? We understand that. How? At the species level. No, this isn't at the gender level. This isn't at the racial level. This is even more basic. At the species level, that is to say, who are we as a species among species? And he says, of course I understand we're still figuring out how to be male and female together. But he said, what's really required is to take it even deeper at the species level with critical reflection, that is to say, not by just emotion or by feeling, but really critically bringing the mind and the heart and the soul together in this reflection. Now, in what context? Not just in a cathedral context, not just in an economic context, not just in a context that has to do with the evening news, but in a context that is the community of life systems. I mean, you can't get much bigger than that. And then he says, in a time developmental context. Now, what does he mean by that? He means that we have to understand that this moment is never to be repeated. So we have this sense about the earth. It's always renewing. Every spring, there are new flowers. Every spring, the earth reveals itself again fresh. No, no, no. This moment never will happen again. So that there is a responsibility now. And how do we live that out, he says? By means of story and shared dream experience. Right? So share your dreams. The deepest, most unconscious part of ourselves is that part that still has access to earth wisdom. The story and the shared dream experience. What's possible once we know the story? Of course, then, what story? What story? Thomas would say, the great story. Now, the great story is the story that every culture now has access to. This is the first time in the human species that we have a creation story, empirically based, with incredible imagery that can inspire the understanding of how the earth came to be across every tradition and across every language. So, Thomas tells this story. He says, I was standing there preparing to speak to a group in California. And Thomas asked the moon, what should I say? And in his gravelly voice, Thomas answered, tell them my story. He asked the wind, what should I say? And the wind answered, tell them my story. He posed the question to the red oak, what should I say? And the answer was the same, tell them my story. The mountain story, the human story, the river story, the sacred story, it's all one story. Tell them the great story. All right, so fasten your seatbelts. Here's a 5-minute version of the great story. 13.7 billion years ago, the universe blooms into existence. Don't think of a bang, think of a bloom. Settling on fundamental laws, stabilizing its life as these baryons and simple nuclei, all these little individual bits flaring forth, blooming forth. Now, conditions just so. Conditions were just so that protons and electrons came into relationships that were impossible in the first blooming forth. But as things slow down, relationships became possible. Think about your life. Things slow down, relationships are possible. Now, for several 100,000 years, the universe expands and cools, and it, at the very most critical moment, becomes hydrogen and helium. Now, I want to say, had this happened a little bit faster, things would have congealed and then burst apart. Nothing would happen. Had it been a little slower, they would have just kept going and going and going. But it was just so, not too fast, not too slow. My, Goldilocks, huh? Not too fast, not too slow. Hydrogen and helium. Now, the creation of hydrogen and helium, these elements, is as stunning as the universe. Nothing could have predicted it. Nothing could have predicted that out of these single electrons and protons, something new could come to be. This is a great mystery, and science itself can't understand this. It is, in a way, as I look at this picture, for me, in terms of my own life, from one to several to many, this to me is a model for community. Huh? So I think, wow, metaphors from the very beginning. Relational from the beginning. The creation of atoms is an event initiated by the universe and completed by the emergent being we call hydrogen. This is a being that suddenly transforms itself into a whole new way of being. And look at the parallel between the inner world and the outer world. This is the solar system. This is the interior of the atoms of which we are composed. See the resonance? Most amazing. New entities quickly follow, and from these molecules and macromolecules, stunning beauty and complexity is lured forth. So in my Franciscan translation, it goes like this: there's always more, and it only gets better. So here we are. Now, just 12 billion years ago, the galaxies and the stars form. 10 billion years ago, our Milky Way spirals into space. This is home. This is home for us. We're somewhere in here, our solar system, somewhere right there. This is our sun, 5 billion years old. Amazing, amazing. And this is literally the energy source for all life that happens on this planet. No sun, no calories. Here we are, and this is our neighborhood. Beautiful, amazing, gorgeous. And then, of course, the moon emerges, changes how the water and how the planets, how the land masses move on this. And then in the conditions, now here's the most amazing, conditions just so. There are little cells smart enough to harness the energy of the sun, carbon dioxide to oxygen, and at a critical point, 2 billion years ago, when the level of oxygen gets to a point beyond which it would be dangerous, so if you have a particular level of oxygen in the atmosphere, if you have more, then it becomes dangerous. Think of going into a hospital room where oxygen is in use, and it's very dangerous. A little static energy could create a flame. Just at the right time, they stop producing. They move to the depths of the seas and into caves, and these purple bacteria emerge that can use the oxygen. Most amazing. Conditions just so. So here, very quickly then, notice how the electrons and protons aggregated, so the cells aggregated. Same movement. And then, of course, the most amazing thing, that there are all manner of extinctions that happen on the process. And so 570 million years ago, 80 to 90% of all species were eliminated. Remarkable. The 10% that are left, lo and behold, keep diversifying so that 510 million years ago, the first fishes emerge. And I'm doing this very fast, lots of stages in between, but to get the feeling for this. Then the insects emerge, then the reptiles evolve, and then live birth becomes feasible. Up until this time, no live birth as we know it. And then more extinctions. 245 million years ago, again, a massive extinction. The life that's left, again, lo and behold, 235 million years, the dinosaurs, these huge creatures on the planet. And then the continental drift takes place, and the Earth takes on the face that we now know. Most remarkable. That was 210 million years ago. Then the birds take flight, and then 65 million years ago, flowers are plentiful. Let me say this. This is a remarkable period of Earth's history. Before this time, before the flowers, there was no color on the planet but earth tones. It wasn't until the conditions were just so that insects could fly, and then, of course, insects are the pollinators. Now, if insects are flying, then those flowers that are more attractive to the pollinators, do you see how it requires conditions of flying insects to have color? Most remarkable. And then, of course, the mammal orders are complete 40 million years ago. This is of interest to us, we who are warm-blooded and hairy. And then 3.3 million years ago, again, there was a major extinction event that created conditions that were good for the ongoing mammals to emerge. And of course, then 2.6 million years ago, there are primates that stand up and begin to exercise their imagination. What's across that hill? And then, of course, the imagination becomes language. The ability to imagine that a sound could have a specific meaning and I can convey something with that particular sound. And then to think of the diversification of human language. And here we are in this great, great, great spiral of ongoing transformations and life. If this isn't a spiritual journey, I don't know what is. And it's the spiritual journey that has been traveled by every element that's on this earth. The very stuff that we're made of, the carbon we're made of, the water we're made of, has this history and this story. No wonder transformation symbols, no wonder images of death and rebirth are such a part of our spiritual experience. We know this deep in our genetic history. So this is what Thomas would say to us. We know this story and tell the story. Now, we're the first generation to tell this story. Many of these things I've shared with you were not known even when I was in high school. It's remarkable that we had that opportunity. And so Thomas Berry will say, the planet Earth is more than a natural resource. It's more than a natural resource because it's the source of our religious imagination. I'll say more about that. Here, Thomas says, we might propose a viable future for the human community rests largely upon a new relationship between the human community and the planet. Both our physical and spiritual survival depend on the visible world around us. Now, how can he say this? Think of it this way. Imagine that you lived on the moon. And all you knew was the dust of the moon. You would not know baptism. You see that? We require water for baptism. We wouldn't have the ability to think of God as the wind rushing through. All of our major metaphors for the divine are based on the experience of the visible world. And so now that we know what's inside the planet, and that's what's throbbing inside the planet, is this amazing molten energy and light and heat, there's another metaphor for what's inside us. Deeply, deeply inside us. So we are moving, Thomas says, with great hope, perversely against good common sense, into a new ecological era, he says. He says what's dawning is an ecozoic era. Now, ecozoic, he says, means house of life. An ecozoic society means a society of life. Echo in Greek is the word for home, echo, echos. So the ecozoic era into which we are moving, we're in between these eras right now. We're moving into a new era of mutually enhancing relationships among humans and the larger community of life. If you've been watching the Weather Channel all this week long, they have been demonstrating ways in which humans are intensely creative about new relationships with Earth. So the great work is living the promise of the ecozoic era. I hope you can feel that promise in the energy that drew you here tonight. So he says, the ecozoic is when human conduct is guided by a new dream. What's the dream? The dream is an integral Earth community when humans will be present in a mutually enhancing manner. So here it is, in a good relationship. It's mutually enhancing. Both benefit, thrive, and flourish in that mutual human-to-human relationship. The same for the earth. Imagine, dream the possibility of it. So the only viable choice we have is to enter the Ecozoic era. That includes the human and the non-human components. When I first met Thomas Berry in 1982, the Earth Charter was first presented at the United Nations. And he was so excited because it gave the oceans and the trees and the incredible diversity of the planet rights in the same way that humans understand rights. So he says this. What is the primary principle? Is that the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. Think of it this way. Well, I'm taking a risk here. Think of your family, a communion of subjects, not objects. That everybody in the family has their own particular experience. My brother and I have two totally different memories of our childhood. We have our own experience. The same with a tree. The tree has its own experience, its own place, its own proper functioning, its own subjective experience. The trees at my campus, the Wheaton Franciscan campus, have a different experience than the trees here at the Theosophical Society. The trees in your backyard, a different experience, a different presentation. And he says, this presentation of the tree, so as you walked into the Theosophical Society, that beautiful, blooming Bradford pear, it has a voice in its blooming, its presence. Its presence is its voice, speaking to us, telling us of its nutrients, of its experience of the winter. It's telling us, can we hear it? And so Thomas says, we have a cultural autism. I think this is so useful. We can't listen. We're so distracted. We are no longer able to listen to the voice of the creatures. The mountains, the valleys, the rain, the wind, the flora and the fauna are all telling us something. The frogs are telling us something. The butterflies are telling us something. The wolves, and even the coyotes in DuPage County are telling us something. So he says this, since the 17th century, we have not heard, not understood the inner world about us. That's because there was this great separation, this meaning-making separation. Religion was spiritual, science was scientific, and real. This is the real thing, quantifiable, measurable. So we miss the internal dimension. No entry into the world of interior meaning. A plant's a plant, a tree's a tree, dirt's dirt. It's only dirt. Hear it? Only dirt. We no longer hear the voices. So he says this, new spiritual sensitivities, and here's where I listen up real sharp as a theologian. From the beginning, the universe had a psychic, spiritual, as well as a physical, material dimension. That is to say, I have spiritual capacities because conditions at the beginning were just so to be able to come to this place. Let me say this. The reason that you're here tonight, Thomas would say, is because the earth called you here. To understand that the earth called you. If you're listening to my voice, it is because the earth called you to listen to my voice. So now, of course, to understand that, new spiritual sensitivities, of course. And he says this, the redemption-oriented religions in their traditional forms have fulfilled a significant part of their historical mission. All right, so it goes like this. I become, I'm doing this very crassly, please forgive me, I become saved to go to heaven. See? So what does the earth matter? That's the problem. That's the problem. Not that there's anything wrong with understanding that, but understanding that it's leaving something out, and the time has come to add that dimension back in. See? Of course, we all keep transforming, transcending, but in that transcendence, to factor in what has made this experience possible. So, he says this, cosmologically oriented religion is the way into the future. We need to recognize the story of the universe as we know it through our empirical sciences as our sacred story. This is a metaphor for Easter because a supernova exploded and gave its life to transform into this galaxy. If that isn't the Paschal event, if that isn't the death and rebirth event, this is the primary empirical validation of that spiritual sensibility. So the earth, he says, in a special manner, has given expression to the psychic spiritual dimension of the universe. It's the human that belongs among these forms. Notice he isn't saying the human is the only one. I remember very clearly the first time that our Hopkins saw a dead carcass of a cat. The cat had been half consumed by a hawk, and just half the carcass was there. And to my great surprise, he went to the carcass of the cat, and he sat down, and he just stared. He just sat and stared. Now, I might say, in my way of anthropomorphizing, that is a spiritual sensibility. We know about the elephants, too, who have a particular rite of mourning when one of their species dies. So the human belongs among these forms that have this spiritual sensibility, this psychic spiritual dimension. And there is no effective spiritual or religious mode of being for the human in isolation from this community. So how to understand, really, that if we even attempt to leave our home Earth, we have to take Earth with us. We cannot exist apart from all that Earth has evolved. The astronauts returning from the space station literally had to take Earth conditions with them. This is our, in this form, our home. The visible world about us is our primary scripture, the primary manifestation of the divine. And this is also true for human communities throughout the entire planet. I just want to say, already in the 13th century, St. Bonaventure said that the first book of scripture that God wrote to reveal God's self was creation. The first book. And then, of course, the second scripture was because we couldn't remember how to read the first book. But to understand that for every major tradition, the primary manifestation is the primary scripture. And so every culture understands this, that moving into nature, sitting in nature, being with nature, provides opportunity for revelation and transformation. Okay. The second principle is an ethical principle, that in addition to suicide, homicide, genocide, there are even more violent crimes, biocide and geocide. That is to say, the wanton killing of the life systems, and then, of course, geocide, the killing of the planet itself in its major forms of expression. And of course, I would point as an example of this, the incredible devastation of the rainforests in the southern hemisphere. So it's a major life system. And that indeed, once in a way, how shall I say this, the rainforests have been domesticated, we will no longer have the expression of a wild rainforest. Another way I want to do this is that already today, there is no polar bear that lives without human dispensation. Every polar bear has been tagged, and every polar bear must be airlifted to its feeding grounds. We have basically had to domesticate, or in a way, farm or husband the polar bear because of the changes that have taken place on the planet. So this, my sisters, as I think about them, as they follow me, your children's children will never again know a wild polar bear in its original expression. Now, truly, because we've known from extinctions, humans can't extinguish life on the planet. What we can do is severely damage the planet beyond recovery. That we can do. And that we can damage it in such a way that in our in our living, in our geological time, because as you know, our species will continue to evolve over several million years. There will be new creatures that have the kind of comprehension we have and more. And of course, they'll think about, oh, those poor people back at the Theosophical Society. And Gabe, who thought she knew what she was saying. So, but in our species' historical time, it's very likely that we can damage the planet beyond recovery. So the third principle, he says, is the Earth is primary. So think of it this way. I am not the creature around which the Earth rotates. Literally, I am part of the Earth, and I am derivative from Earth. I'm an Earthling. I can't escape that reality. So the primary concern of every profession, institute, and activity, human activity, betrays itself. That is to say, does not serve us, literally betrays us, if it doesn't make the Earth community its primary reference. So let me just say it this way. The Earth is self-governing, and that governance is primary. Now imagine taking this to Capitol Hill and explaining to the Senate and to the House that really Earth laws trump human laws. We're not there yet. But this is the dream. This is the dream that can lure us. This is the dream that can push us forward. And if we begin to take steps to make the Earth the primary referent. So, Earth is primary. That is to say, to structure our life in such a way that it is within the ever-renewing cycle of the Earth community. Earth health, Earth governance, Earth productivity, Earth education, so that is to say, Earth heals, Earth governs, Earth produces, Earth educates. With that as the understanding, then develop human community. It's an amazing dream, and perverse, and I count on it. So, human omnipresence and responsibility. So, in the geological period, just that was now ending, with all the extinctions, that period is ending, through the Cenozoic, the Earth really evolved independent of the human. In this emerging Ecozoic period, nothing will happen that is not in some way human determined. Okay, so he says this, there is liable not to be a blade of grass if it is not accepted, protected, and fostered by the human. Think about that. If there is to be a rainforest, we allow it. If there is to be a polar bear, we allow it. If there are to be species of frogs, we allow them, support them, foster them. So now, progress, this famous American word, progress. Any valid progress must be the progress of the entire life community, not the progress of the human at the expense of the non-human members of the community. Think about this. So that is to say, if the Wheaton Franciscans flourish, then they flourish at in collaboration with the 60 acres that are ours to steward. We flourish in communion with those creatures, that land. And of course, think about progress and think how we think about progress. Typically, it is only a human-determined, let me say it this way, only a human-determined, only a North American-determined, some might say only a male-determined. See how this is problematic for us, the idea. How do we understand progress? Progress for whom and at what cost? This is a deep spiritual issue. So now, what we need to help us is celebration. So I asked Thomas, here I am, this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young novice. He said, Father Barry, so what are we supposed to do? He said, fall in love with your backyard and celebrate your backyard. So he puts it this way, the universe in its vast extent in space and all of its transformations. So from that moment of the first blooming forth to now is one event, not series of events through time. So let me say it this way. The tree blooming at the door that you walked in, imagine that blooming to be understood as the same event, a continuation, the same event of when the seed was put in the ground. See that? It's all one event, one event. It's all one moment. We have, of course, our human moments. It's all one moment, and it's continuing. That moment hasn't ended yet. No beginning and no end. no beginning and no end. Now again, doesn't that sound like religious language? The universe as a single, multiple celebration. So he says the planet Earth, in particular, there is no other planet like it in our solar system. No other planet. So the sun is pouring forth all this energy. The Earth has been able to capture the energy and diversify unlike any other planet in the solar system. So he says this diversification is a celebration. So it's like a good jazz riff. You keep playing with it over and over again, over and over again. Keep expanding. Keep trying different ways to do the same. This is a celebration. So now, this is a privileged planet to whom much is given, much is asked. So he says, when we ask the meaning of the flight of the birds, their song, what is the meaning of the fish in the sea? What is the meaning of the cicada? What is the meaning of those glorious flowers blooming? What is the meaning of the dandelions dispersing their seeds all over? You can give a pragmatic answer. But the best answer is a felt human response, and that is the sheer exhilaration of expansion and dispersion. There's something exhilarating about that blooming forth, and it's particularly powerful in the springtime. So, celebrating, celebrating, celebrating. So he says, if we celebrate our backyard, celebrate the earthworms, celebrate the mosquitoes, celebrate the seeds you've planted, celebrate the place for the dog to poop, celebrate, celebrate. Think of every possible way to celebrate the backyard, to celebrate yourself, this incredible creation that we are. Then things become possible. Then we can dream. If we can celebrate, we can dream. So, to remember this, here's the hope. Here is the hope. From the beginning, those dynamics of relationship, those dynamics of coming together to transform and to become new, an ever larger community, this is in our genes. So if this dynamism can shape the heavens, like the sun, form the earth, if this same dynamism can form the continents and the seas, if it can awaken life and it bring us forth through all these billion years, then hope, then there's reason to believe, Thomas would say. And of course, sensitized to such guidance from the universe, we have confidence in the future that awaits the human venture. So he says this, if we dare to go deep enough interiorly, we'll tap the universe wisdom, the transcendent wisdom. Now notice I could say transcendental wisdom, I could say perennial wisdom, I could say the revelation of the divine, all this here. So it's like this, the great self, he would say, the satisfaction we experience in the forest, seeing a turtle nest, mesmerized by the river. These are encounters with our great self, the source, and our fulfillment. So now I offer you photos of the elder Thomas Berry. These were taken shortly before he died in 2009. So this is January of 2009. This great teacher. And when he was asked about death, he said, you know, one day I'm going to have to get out of the way. He had a big thing about getting out of the way, creating the space so that the new can emerge. So he says, we're born of others, we survive through others, we die into others. This is the community process. This is what the universe is. The supernova to the galaxies, to the sun, become planets and solar systems. It's all part of the same process. He says, I think of it like a symphony. Nothing happens in time that doesn't have an external dimension, like music. So you have a sequence of notes and a sequence of time, but you really have to understand it, he says, outside time. Sure, you can listen to the sequence of notes, but if all you do is pay attention to one note, one note, one note, you miss the symphony. It has to be understood in the whole experience of the full arc of the symphony. So you can know one tree very technically, one tree very technically, one tree very technically, but to know a forest you have the full arc of it. Huh? To know a person's life, their birth through their death is the full arc, and the celebration of the full of that. So he says the universe, too, is played out in sequence, and we're in that sequence, but it also exists outside the sequence, hence the transcendent wisdom. There is the full arc of the symphony that exists as it is being played. When the symphony begins, there is the ending here, awaiting itself as the last note is played. Do you see how that works? It's remarkable to think about it. Think about my life that way. So, a total process. Our whole being is part of the process. The whole life process is transcendent to time. This is the scene of the burial of Thomas Berry. His whole life, the whole arc of it now come together, and here is the celebration of the death of Thomas Berry. So now, in a way, he is the seed that is now blossoming forth in so many other lives, this great flaring forth like the tree. So he says this, we are as old as the universe and as big as the universe. Birth and death are contained in the reality of our existence. That's our great self. We survive death in our great self. There is no dying, there is only transformation and new life. So hope. I want to say this, the Ecozoic era is available to us. By the way, this is a Victor Franz a sculpture. You may know him as that wonderful creative artist. As regards the future, it may be useful to consider that recovering our awareness of the universe, a communion of subjects. We're here together in our own individual experience, collected, and it's available to us as our minds awaken to a world of wonder. How many times did you wonder today? That was the spiritual moment. When there was wonder, did you have a moment for wonder? Our imaginations to a world of beauty. Did something take your breath away with its beauty today? Did you notice something beautiful today? And our emotions to a world of intimacy. Did you feel a connection with something, someone today? This is our way into the future. Very simple spiritual practice, huh? We can find rules for these in every great major spiritual tradition. We call it meditation and contemplation. So he ends his dream of the earth with this poem. And so I want to end my presentation to you with this poem. And then we'll have opportunity for conversation. So, to the children that swim beneath the waves of the sea, to those who live in the soils of the earth, to the children of the flowers in the meadows and the trees in the forest, to the children of the tree blooming at the door of the Theosophical Society, to all those children who roam over the land and the winged ones who fly with the winds, to the human children too, that all the children may go together into the future in the full diversity of their regional communities. Amen. Thank you. And so if we could have the lights, perhaps we could see the community gathered here. All the earthlings present and accounted for. So if you would just take a moment to see if anything moved you, if you found yourself resonating. Yes?
Please wait for the mic. That one slide that you had where you mentioned that you would need 4 times the amount of earth. What were you getting at? The fact that if we all brought earth into our consciousness, that
no.
would need...
Yeah. Let me explain. So, for example, if I would wish that the woman who I saw online in Afghanistan would have the opportunities that I have, it would take 4 earths to accomplish that. See, in other words, we need that many resources for everybody to have as much as I do.
So you're saying that we here in the United States, relative to the rest of the world, are 4 times as lucky or fortunate as those people.
Actually, it's more than 4 times. We practically use 80% of the Earth's resources.
Here in the United States?
Yes. 80% of the world's resources is to the North American continent. And so the whole rest of the world has the 20% that's left. So it's really compelling to understand that. And of course, we wish everyone well. You know, I have these, I pray these blessings of good intention and to understand that I really am very privileged in my being. And this indeed is the place in which I've been planted, and these opportunities are afforded me. So now I think, what is my response? And really, for the first time, I can say that I will have the opportunity this fall to move into a home that I can feel ethically at peace with. Right now, I live in a mansion that's over 100 years old, and it has 6 furnaces. I mean, it's just a reality. So, you know, as I was working with this ecological material, I always have this niggling, you know, conscience saying to me, "What are you doing with this?" But I want to say it also afforded me the ability for this articulation. So I bless it and thank it. So this isn't about guilt. This is about my ongoing flaring forth, my ongoing blossoming, and to make choices about that blossoming. You see, it's not because the way you have lived brought you here. This is terrific. You see? So it's not about guilt. It is about now blooming in a way that takes the earth into account. And that's the wonder of it, you know. So to be grateful for the opportunities that we've had and to bless them and to know that they came at a cost. For example, my mother and father worked every day so that I could have the education I had. I bless it. Bless it. This resource was given me. Now do something with it. Understand its meaning. Understand my father and mother's life force is speaking here with you today. But not just their life force, the life force of the orange juice that I drank this morning, the life force of the banana, the life force of the very things that are giving me calories so I have the energy to open my mouth. Do you see? Which is ultimately the life force of the sun giving itself away and burning itself up. So, you know, every second, 500 million tons of the sun are being transformed into energy. And the sun is literally burning itself up, giving forth energy that we've been astute enough to capture on this planet. Thank you, the first prokaryotes. They figured it out. Photosynthesis, so it's like that. Thank you for asking the question.
What you said was very beautiful, and it reminded me, David and I just went to the Parliament of World Religions this past December, and they had Aboriginal people there. And there was a saying of the Aboriginals that I just think is so beautiful, and it relates to this. And when someone visits them as their way of showing hospitality, they take a leaf or branch of the gum tree and they say, "I give you this as a symbol that you are very welcome here. And as long as you're here, you're welcome to, from everything from the tips of the leaves to the roots of the trees. I only ask that while you're here, you not harm the land or the children of the land."
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. That puts me in mind of the Iroquois Thanksgiving ritual, which of course informs our Thanksgiving. And the Iroquois ritual goes like this. At the beginning of every longhouse meeting, someone will stand up, usually one of the grandmothers, and begin to name all the different things that made the meeting possible. So she'll name the timbers that are holding up the longhouse. She'll name the deer for which she has clothing. I mean, everything from the very minerals in the food to the wind and the waters. And then they say this: "May I arrange my life in such a way that I am worthy of this giveaway." May I arrange my life in such a way I'm worthy of this giveaway. It's a way of gratitude and thanksgiving. And this is the primordial archetype of our Thanksgiving. So to recover that and to understand that, it's a beautiful thing. It's lovely. See, our native, our indigenous, our aboriginal brothers and sisters have access to this deep inner wisdom in a way that we don't, because we've separated ourselves out in terms of our scientific reality. So to relearn, see, the wisdom's available to us to relearn. And I want to say this. So if you read of a spirituality like that is beautiful, and you're drawn to it and you resonate, Thomas Berry would say, that's not you resonating. That's the earth resonating with itself. It's the earth resonating with itself. If it rings true, earth to earth. So we're like, if you can imagine, the 5 senses of the planet. And we have the capacity to celebrate that. That's how he would say it, huh? So we know, that's our role. He said, fish, so the fishes fly, oh, Gabe. Birds fly, fishes swim, earthworms crawl, and the human celebrates. Thank you. Anything else? It's so great to see your faces. I was in the dark before.
I'm trying to put several sources together. It occurred to me that as the sun is actually burning itself out, and eventually, zillions of eons, there will be nothing left. But the sun is giving itself away so that we might have life.
Exactly.
And I'm thinking of that image of the 4 or 5 Earths.
Yeah.
In our 80% of resources, that's where we have the call as Western, but particularly Americans, the call of the earth to a change of heart.
Yes.
That we continue to consume so much while others do not even have enough to live.
Right.
And then since we're not going to get 5 other Earths, this is not going to be able to, the Earth is not going to be able to sustain us.
Right.
And maybe we will be at the end of the line of feeling that, but that there are peoples, and the creatures are already, the rainforest, the creatures, the people in the rainforest, the people in the third world are already feeling the destitution and the destruction. So
Thomas would say, here, let me just say, because I can see the spiral. I really say, so it's like this. To think of the problem in its macro phase is disempowering, right? So imagine, to think of the human race in its macro phase is terribly disempowering. Where do you start, right? To think of you in relationship to someone else, it's very clear, right? So it's very clear. And watch this. As I get to know you and love you, I will willingly pour out life. And I will willingly give away, because it's exhilarating to give away. It's celebrative to give away, huh? I willingly do that. There isn't any guilt, there isn't any question about it. It happens naturally. This great gifting in relationship. Do you see that? So it isn't about how bad we've been, it's how good we can be. Do you see? It's about because what we've done to this moment brings us to that heart leap, if you will, or that spiritual insight, that aha, where I sense my connection and I cannot go back. I cannot go back, and I must do it. And it's exhilarating, yes.
In a way, like we inspire and energize one another.
Yes, inspiration and energy, that's exactly it. So allow the sun's giveaway to inspire you, and it has not only a physical energy, but a psychic energy. There's the psychic dimension, and we have access to it.
This evening has been just really great.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I would hope that we could take away is something you just started to get at. It is so easy for us to feel crushed by the load and therefore just give up, as opposed to being in each of our little environments representative of what it is in our heart. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's one of the tragedies within institutional religion now, because institutional religion is so into itself in terms of making sure it has enough money and saving people from what they don't need to be saved from, that we forget that we've got a much deeper responsibility to this earth.
Yeah. I want to say the primary role of religion is inspiration and celebration, and empowering, and and then, of course, to create the conditions whereby people can inspire and celebrate. And that, of course, then includes the great healing traditions in spirituality as well. Huh? So to be healed, so I can inspire and celebrate. I want to say every major spiritual tradition at its root has these primary understandings that can be recovered. Because I'm thinking now in my own Christian tradition, I'm thinking in the Buddhist tradition, there are experiences of our major figures in nature that show us the possibility of nature. So it's there, it's there.